They didn't just burn my storage, they burned my livelihood. In the middle of November, when winter was approaching, and my livestock needed feed reserves to survive, the homeowners association decided my storage barn was too unsightly, so they burned it down in the night. No warning, no remorse. I stood in the ashes of 4 months of preparation, watching 200 hay bales and tons of livestock feed turn to dust. They called it enforcing regulations. I called it arson. And when they told me to stay quiet and accept it, I picked up my loaded shotgun. They didn't know that the shotgun carried something they never expected, something that would bring it all crashing down. The smell woke me before the sun did, 5:47 a.m., and the air coming through my bedroom window carried the stench of burned grain, scorched hay, and something chemical that didn't belong on my land. I grabbed my Remington 870 from beside the bed, the same shotgun I had loaded at 2 a.m. when a scraping noise pulled me from sleep. Back then, I had stepped onto the porch and scanned the darkness for coyotes, but saw nothing except the quiet silhouette of my storage barn against the tree line. The night had been still. No movement, no smoke, no sign of trouble. I went back to bed, figuring the sound was just wind rattling the fence. Now, standing in my doorway 3 hours later, I understood the terrible truth. The fire had started after I went back inside. Someone had waited for me to give up looking. My storage barn was gone. The corrugated metal walls had collapsed inward, beams twisted at grotesque angles from heat that must have burned fast and fierce. 200 hay bales, 40 bags of grain supplement, and a feed mixer I had saved 3 years to purchase. $8,000 of equipment, plus 4 months of preparation for winter, all reduced to ash and warped steel. I walked through the debris slowly, boots crunching on still warm remains, and forced myself to look at every detail, not to mourn, but to understand. The burn pattern spread outward from the northeast corner, the side facing away from my house. Deliberate positioning. Whoever did this knew exactly which angle would hide the flames longest from my bedroom window. This was not an accident. This was calculated destruction. 3 weeks earlier, I had received my first notice from the Ridgecrest Meadows Homeowners Association, a crisp white envelope with the HOA logo embossed in gold, containing a single page that informed me my storage barn violated Section 12 of the Community Aesthetic Guidelines, inconsistent with neighborhood standards, the letter claimed, despite my property sitting at the edge of the development, 800 feet from the nearest house. I had bought this 15-acre plot specifically because it was zoned for agricultural use, a place where I could raise goats and chickens without bothering anyone. The CC&Rs I signed made exceptions for working farms. When I called to dispute the violation, I reached a woman whose voice carried the warmth of frozen steel. Gloria Whitfield, HOA president. Rules are rules. Mr. Thornton, compliance is expected within 30 days. I never got those 30 days. Kneeling in the debris, I spotted something wedged between a fallen beam and the concrete foundation. A scrap of black fabric, maybe 2 inches square, partially melted but recognizable as heavy-duty synthetic material, the kind used in industrial work gloves. Available at any hardware store for $15. I didn't own gloves like that. My hands worked in leather, always had. I pulled a plastic sandwich bag from my pocket and sealed the fabric inside. The same way I used to document evidence during my years in the Marines. Old habits that suddenly felt essential again. Someone had made a mistake, left a piece of themselves behind, and that piece was now mine. As I stood, my grip tightened on the Remington, and I noticed something I had nearly forgotten. Mounted on the barrel was a small weatherproof trail camera, a device I had installed 3 months ago to monitor predator activity near my livestock pens. Motion activated, infrared capable, designed to record anything larger than a rabbit within its field of view. I had removed the memory card 2 nights ago because it was full, intending to review the footage and swap in a fresh one. I never got around to it, which meant the camera had been running on internal storage when I stepped outside at 2 a.m. It wouldn't have captured the fire itself from this distance, but it might have recorded whatever I missed in those dark hours. The timestamp alone could matter. The thought sent a cold spark of determination through my chest. The first thing resembling hope since I smelled the smoke. Tires crunched on gravel, pulling my attention toward the main road. A white SUV bearing the HOA logo rolled slowly up my drive. stopping just past the property marker as if the driver wanted a clear view before committing further. The door opened, and Gloria Whitfield stepped out, dressed in a tailored coat that seemed absurd for 6 in the morning, her silver blonde hair pulled into a bun so tight it sharpened every angle of her face. She walked toward me with measured steps, phone in hand, and I caught a glimpse of the screen before she pocketed it. A notification from something called Property Watch, the HOA's automated monitoring service that alerted board members to emergency calls within the community. Someone had reported smoke. Of course, she would be the first to know. Gloria stopped 10 feet from the wreckage and surveyed the scene with an expression I could not read. No shock, no sympathy. Nothing that suggested this destruction surprised her. She tilted her head slightly, examining the collapsed barn the way someone might inspect a stain on an otherwise clean carpet. "What a terrible accident. Mr. Thornton," she said, her voice polished and cold. "I became as soon as the alert came through. Such a shame." She paused, letting her gaze drift across the ash and twisted metal. "Perhaps this is a sign that agricultural operations simply aren't suited for our community. The board would be happy to discuss relocation assistance if you're interested." She smiled then, a thin curve of her lips that never reached her eyes. I said nothing. I just watched her, memorizing every detail of her composure, and felt the weight of the evidence bag in my pocket. She thought this was over. She had no idea it was just beginning. 1 week after the fire, I walked into the HOA administrative office with a formal request for investigation support. According to Section 8 of the CC&Rs, the association held responsibility for community security matters, which I argued should include arson on a member's property. The receptionist took my paperwork with a polite smile and disappeared into a back office. 10 minutes later, Gloria Whitfield emerged, still wearing that same cold composure I remembered from the morning she stood in my ashes. She didn't invite me to sit. "Mr. Thornton," she said, flipping through my request without reading it, "this appears to be a personal matter. The HOA's security provisions apply to common areas only." I pointed out that the fire endangered the entire community, that sparks could have spread to neighboring lots. She set the papers on the counter and slid them back toward me. "File a claim with your insurance company. That's the appropriate channel." Her tone made clear the conversation was over. 3 new violation notices waited in my mailbox when I got home. The first cited my perimeter fence for being 4 inches below the minimum height, dated 3 weeks prior, but postmarked yesterday. The second complaint of odor violations from livestock waste, also backdated, was filed anonymously but approved by the board within 24 hours of submission. The third accused me of noise disturbances from agricultural equipment, a tractor I hadn't started in 2 weeks. Each notice carried a fine $500 for the fence, $700 for the odor, $800 for the noise. All 3 showed filing dates before the fire, yet I had never received them until now. Someone had reached into the system and manufactured a paper trail, creating the appearance of ongoing violations that justified immediate action. Payment was due within 14 days. That night, I pulled out the CC&Rs I had signed when I purchased the property. 47 pages of dense legal language that I had trusted a real estate agent to interpret 8 years ago. Now, I read every word. Searching for weapons, I found them quickly. Section 12 allowed the board to determine aesthetic violations at its sole discretion. Section 15 permitted fines to accumulate interest at 3% monthly. Section 23 authorized liens against properties with unpaid assessments. But the clause that chilled me most was buried in Section 9 emergency hearings, could be convened with 48 hours notice if the board deemed a matter urgent to community welfare. They had built themselves a machine for crushing anyone they decided didn't belong. I spent the next 3 days researching state law instead of mourning what I had lost. What I found changed everything. The Right to Farm Act, passed specifically to protect working farms from nuisance complaints, explicitly limited HOA authority over agricultural operations on A1 zoned land. My property had carried that designation since before Ridgecrest Meadows existed. The odor complaint, the noise complaint, and even the original aesthetic violation against my barn all fell under protections that should have made them unenforceable. I drafted a formal complaint to the HOA board requesting a hearing to present my case. The response arrived 2 days later, citing Section 9. My hearing was scheduled for Wednesday at 2 p.m., 48 hours from the notice. Emergency session, the letter said, community welfare concerns regarding the ongoing agricultural nuisance. They were using their own bylaws to ambush me. The hearing notice sat on my desk beside my laptop, where I had been searching the County Planning Commission's public records portal for any pending development applications in the area. The search was routine due diligence, the kind of background check I should have done years ago. The results were not routine, filed 7 months earlier. A preliminary zoning variance request from Meridian Development Group outlined plans for something called Ridgecrest Resort and Spa, 200 acres of luxury accommodations and world-class amenities. The application promised. The attached survey map showed the planned footprint in precise detail, overlaid on a satellite image I immediately recognized. My 15 acres sat dead center in their acquisition zone, marked in yellow as future Phase 2 expansion. No one had ever contacted me about selling. No letter, no phone call, no knock on my door. They had simply drawn my land into their vision as if I had already agreed to disappear. I was still processing this discovery when my phone rang. Gloria's number appeared on the screen. I answered, keeping my voice flat, and she got straight to business. Mr. Thornton, I wanted to follow up before your hearing. One of our property watch alerts flagged unusual activity near your barn the night of the fire. Some kind of motion sensor trigger around 2 a.m. I assumed you might have received similar alerts from your own security system. The lie was smooth, almost casual, designed to make me reveal what I had. I thought about the trail camera mounted on my Remington, the one that had been recording when I stepped outside that night. Just wildlife cameras, I said. Motion activated, for tracking predators, nothing that covers the barn area. The pause on her end stretched 2 full seconds. When she spoke again, the tension in her voice had dissolved into something like satisfaction. That's a shame. Well, we'll see you on Wednesday then. She hung up, and I sat holding the phone, replaying the subtle shift in her tone. She had been fishing, using the property watch system as cover for a question she desperately needed answered, and I had told her exactly what she wanted to hear. My cameras didn't see anything. My evidence was gone with the barn. She believed herself safe, and for now, I needed her to keep believing that. I set the phone down and opened my email, intending to review the right to farm statutes one more time before the hearing. A new message waited at the top of my inbox. Sender marked urgent, subject line from my bank. The Ridgecrest Meadows Homeowners Association had filed a lien against my property for unpaid violation assessments totaling $12,400, fines, administrative fees, and interest charges, all calculated from the backdated notices I had received only days ago. According to the filing, I had 90 days to pay in full, or the HOA could initiate foreclosure proceedings. $12,000 for violations manufactured out of thin air, stacked on top of a barn someone else had burned to the ground. They weren't just trying to push me out. They were building a legal cage around everything I owned, tightening it faster than I could find the key. The numbers kept me awake at night. I spread every document across my kitchen table and calculated the damage with the same precision I had once used to plan supply routes in Afghanistan. The lien totaled $12,400, but that figure was already obsolete. Buried in Section 15 of the CC&Rs was an escalation clause amended just 8 months ago, allowing daily penalties of $50 for unresolved violations deemed urgent by the board. My 3 citations had all been classified as urgent. By the time I finished tallying the accumulated interest and fees, the actual amount had climbed to $13,600. My savings held $8,200, everything left after buying winter feed that was now ash. Even emptying my account would leave me $5,000 short, with nothing remaining to rebuild. The math was simple and brutal. They had designed a debt I could never escape. The insurance company delivered its verdict 3 days before my HOA hearing, a certified letter requiring my signature to confirm I had received the bad news. My claim for the storage barn fire had been denied pending investigation. The adjuster's report focused on one detail: the 3-hour gap between when I reported hearing noise at 2 a.m. and when flames were discovered at 5:47. Why hadn't I smelled smoke earlier? Why hadn't I checked the barn before returning to bed? The questions implied what the letter never stated directly. They suspected I had started the fire myself and waited for it to burn long enough to destroy evidence. Without a report from the state fire marshal confirming accidental or criminal origin, My claim would close permanently in 60 days. I called Roger Finch at the county fire station and asked when he could inspect the property. 4 to 6 weeks, he said, maybe sooner if I could provide evidence of foul play. The delay was a wall I couldn't climb. No fire marshal report meant no insurance payout. No payout meant no funds to fight the lien. The system had locked together perfectly. The rumors found me through silence rather than words. At the hardware store on Miller Road, where I had bought supplies for 8 years. The owner's wife processed my purchase without meeting my eyes. At the gas station 2 miles from my property, a conversation stopped dead the moment I walked through the door. Insurance fraud. Burned it himself. The phrases hung in the air as I paid and left. I didn't need to guess who had planted those seeds. Only someone with knowledge of my denied claim could have spread such specific accusations. And only someone trusted by the community would be believed without question. The whispers carried a signature I recognized, even if no name was attached. Gloria didn't need to accuse me publicly. She only needed to express concern to a few neighbors about the suspicious timing, the financial difficulties, and the convenient destruction. The community did the rest on its own. I filed a formal request for HOA financial records under Civil Code Section 4765, which required the association to provide access within 10 business days. They took 12. What arrived was carefully useless. Photocopied financial statements with numbers too blurred to verify, scanned meeting minutes degraded beyond legibility, but the most telling detail was the gap. 3 consecutive pages were missing from the minutes dated 14 months ago, precisely the period when Gloria won her 3rd term, and the board voted to expand aesthetic regulations. The pages before the gap discussed pending amendments. The pages after referenced approved changes without explanation. Whatever had been decided in those missing meetings, someone had ensured there would be no record of how or why. I almost missed the line item that changed everything. Buried between legitimate expenses for landscaping and pool maintenance was an entry that made me read it 3 times. Whitfield and Associates, consulting fee, $15,000. The charges repeated quarterly, totaling $60,000 annually. I had served on enough military procurement boards to know that HOAs of this size rarely hired outside consultants, and never at rates this high. A quick search of the state business registry confirmed my suspicion. Whitfield and Associates had been registered 18 months ago by Gloria Whitfield and Derek Holloway, the vice president who sat beside her at every board meeting. Their listed purpose was real estate consulting. Their only client appeared to be the association they controlled. They were funneling homeowner fees into their own pockets through a company that existed solely to receive payment. The connection to Meridian Development crystallized when I compared the dates. Whitfield and Associates was registered 3 months after Meridian filed its resort application with the county. The consulting fees started flowing 1 month later. Gloria wasn't enforcing community standards. She was being paid to clear obstacles from a development deal, and my farm blocked Phase 2 expansion. The violations, the fines, the lien, all of it was designed to force me into selling or defaulting. They didn't need to offer market value for my land if they could seize it through foreclosure at a fraction of the cost. I checked the timestamps on my violation notices again and noticed something I had overlooked before. All 3 had been processed after business hours. 2 of them stamped at 11:47 p.m. on consecutive nights. Someone with system access was working late to build my case file as quickly as possible. Wednesday arrived cold and gray. I gathered my documentation and drove to the community center, where the board conducted hearings. The parking lot held 4 cars, exactly as Gloria had planned by scheduling during work hours. Inside, 5 board members sat behind a folding table, Gloria at the center with Derek Holloway on her right. She smiled when I entered. "Mr. Thornton, thank you for joining us. Before we begin, I should inform you that additional complaints have been filed since your last notice. Your outstanding balance now stands at $14,200. She slid a paper across the table, watching my face for reaction. We've also learned that your insurance claim was denied. Given your circumstances, the board is prepared to offer a reasonable solution. She paused, letting silence fill the room. Meridian Development has expressed interest in purchasing distressed properties in our community. They have authorized me to present you with a fair offer. The number on the paper was less than half my land's value. I looked at Gloria's calm expression, at Derek's carefully blank face, at the other board members who wouldn't meet my eyes. They had built a cage around everything I owned, and now they were offering me a key that would cost me my home. The trap was complete. They just needed me to walk into it. Winter came early that year, and it came without mercy. The first frost hit 3 days after the HOA hearing, coating my pastures in white and dropping temperatures below what my remaining livestock could survive without proper shelter and feed. I had rejected Gloria's offer, but rejection didn't fill my empty storage barn or stop the debt from climbing. The math left me no choice. I called the livestock auction house in Millbrook and arranged to sell most of my herd. 40 goats I had raised from kids, 100 chickens that had been producing eggs for local markets, 8 years of building something real, loaded onto trailers and driven away for prices that barely covered transportation. I kept 5 goats and 20 chickens, enough to maintain legal classification as a working farm. The auction brought $6,200. I wired $5,800 to the HOA, leaving $7,800 still owed and $400 to survive the winter. I called Roger Finch the next morning and told him I had evidence worth examining. When I mentioned the connection between the HOA president and a development company with a financial interest in my land, his tone changed immediately. "That triggers our conflict of interest protocol," he said. "I can be there in 2 hours." He arrived on time, and we walked to the burn site together while I laid out what I had found about Whitfield and Associates. Roger listened without interrupting, his expression shifting from routine interest to focused attention. "Motive helps build a case," he said when I finished, "but it doesn't prove action. I need physical evidence of arson." I gave him the synthetic fabric I had recovered from the debris. He bagged it properly and promised to expedite the lab analysis. "But fabric alone won't identify who was here that night," he warned. "I need something that puts specific individuals at the scene." That night, I sat at my kitchen table with the Remington 870 laid out before me. The trail camera was still mounted to the barrel, its weatherproof housing scratched but intact. I had been avoiding this moment for weeks, afraid of what I might find or fail to find. The camera had been recording on internal storage when I walked outside at 2 a.m., responding to the noise that had pulled me from sleep. I hadn't seen anything in the darkness, but the camera's infrared sensor could detect heat signatures invisible to human eyes. If anyone had been near that barn, the camera might have recorded them. I removed the memory card and inserted it into my laptop. The file directory showed 17 clips recorded over 48 hours, each triggered by motion. Most were wildlife, but the clip, time-stamped at 1:53 a.m., stopped my breath. The image was grainy, washed with infrared distortion, the figures captured at the far edge of the camera's effective range. 2 people are moving near the northeast corner of my storage barn, exactly where Roger said the fire had originated. The footage was degraded by distance, maybe 70 yards from where I had been standing on the porch. Details blurred at that range, but I could see enough. One figure, tall and thin, moving with nervous energy, the other shorter, more deliberate, gesturing commands. They were pouring liquid from a container onto the base of the structure. The clip lasted 47 seconds before they retreated toward the road, disappearing beyond the frame. 6 minutes later, according to the next timestamp, smoke began to rise. I watched the footage repeatedly over the next 3 nights, adjusting brightness, freezing frames, searching for any detail that might identify the figures. The faces remained obscured by distance and angle, the camera positioned for wildlife tracking rather than surveillance, but body language carried its own signature. The taller figure hesitated twice, glancing toward my house. The shorter one never wavered, never looked anywhere except at the work. I recognized something in that composure, the same controlled stillness I had seen in Gloria's expression the morning she surveyed my ashes, the same nervous tension Derek had shown at the hearing, avoiding my eyes while others spoke. These observations proved nothing by themselves. Body language wasn't evidence, but combined with everything else I had learned, they pointed toward a conclusion I couldn't ignore. I spent the following week searching public records, working late into each night until the patterns emerged. State transparency laws required corporations doing business with government entities to file detailed disclosures, and Meridian Development had contracts with 3 county agencies. Their annual filing listed all consultants engaged for land acquisition projects. On page 37, I found what I was looking for. Whitfield and Associates contracted for property evaluation and owner negotiations in the Ridgecrest corridor. $180,000 over 3 years. Gloria wasn't just skimming fees from the HOA she controlled. She was receiving direct payment from the developer who wanted my land, hired specifically to remove obstacles from their expansion path. The fire, the violations, the manufactured debt, all of it served a single purpose: force me to sell or default, then acquire my property at foreclosure prices. My farm wasn't a nuisance to the community. It was an obstacle to a business arrangement worth millions. I saved the video file to 3 separate locations and emailed a copy to an encrypted address only I could access. The footage was circumstantial, the faces unclear, the connection to Gloria and Derek based on inference rather than proof. A good lawyer could argue that the figures might be anyone, but circumstantial evidence accumulates. The fabric sample was at the state lab. The financial records documented payments that no legitimate consulting arrangement could justify. The development filings showed exactly who benefited from my destruction. Each piece alone meant nothing. Together, they formed the outline of a conspiracy that stretched from my burned storage barn to corporate boardrooms I had never seen. For the first time since that November morning, I understood exactly what had been done to me and why. Now, I needed to find the evidence that would make others understand, too. The Ridgecrest Meadows annual meeting took place on the second Saturday of December, held in the community center's main hall, where 73 residents gathered to approve budgets, elect board members, and address whatever business the association deemed necessary. I arrived early, taking a seat in the back row where I could observe without drawing attention. The agenda had been posted online 3 days prior, and buried at the bottom was a single line that made my presence mandatory. Item 7, Review of Ongoing Violation Status for Property 47. My firm. Gloria had scheduled my public examination as the final act of her annual performance, confident that by then the audience would be tired and compliant. Gloria called the meeting to order at exactly 10 a.m., her voice carrying practiced authority. The first 6 agenda items moved quickly, but not without friction. When she announced a 12% increase in pool maintenance fees, a man in the 4th row muttered loud enough for everyone to hear. 3rd increase in 2 years, and the filter still doesn't work. Gloria ignored the comment, but I noticed Walter Briggs, one of the original Ridgecrest residents, writing something in a small notebook. During the landscaping contract renewal, a woman near the windows asked why the same company had been retained, despite repeated complaints about dead shrubs along the entrance. Gloria's answer was clipped, dismissive. Quality contractors are difficult to find. We're fortunate to have consistency. The woman sat down but didn't look satisfied. Small cracks, barely visible, but present. When Gloria reached item 7, her tone shifted to something softer, almost sympathetic. As many of you know, we've had ongoing concerns about Property 47, the agricultural operation at our eastern boundary. The owner, Mr. Thornton, has accumulated significant violations and has been offered assistance, including a fair purchase offer from a reputable developer, but has chosen to remain non-compliant. She gestured toward me with an open palm. Mr. Thornton, would you like to address the membership? You have 3 minutes. And I walked to the front, feeling the weight of attention from every direction. I had prepared carefully, rehearsed what to reveal and what to hold back. The enhanced footage waiting on my laptop was my strongest weapon. But weapons work best when your enemy doesn't expect them. Today was about planting questions, not providing answers. I reached the podium and faced the room. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I have 3 questions for the board. Gloria's smile tightened, but held. I continued before she could interrupt. First, can anyone explain why our financial statements show quarterly payments of $15,000 to Whitfield and Associates, a consulting firm registered to our president and vice president? A ripple of murmurs moved through the audience. Second, why are 3 consecutive pages missing from the meeting minutes dated 14 months ago, precisely when new aesthetic regulations were approved? The murmurs sharpened into whispered conversations. Third, why does the County Planning Commission have documents showing my property marked for acquisition by Meridian Development, when I have never received any offer to sell? Gloria raised her hand. Mr. Thornton is making unfounded accusations to distract from his own violations. These questions are not appropriate for this forum. But before she could continue, A woman in the third row stood up. Martha Jennings, 62 years old, is my nearest neighbor. Her front window faced the main road, and I had seen her silhouette there on many sleepless nights when arthritis kept her from rest. She looked nervous, hands clasped tightly, but her voice carried across the silent room. The night of Mr. Thornton's fire. I was awake around 2 a.m. I was sitting at my window the way I do when my joints won't let me sleep. I saw a vehicle parked near the entrance to his property for maybe 20 minutes. Then it drove away without headlights. She paused, her gaze moving to Derek Holloway. It was a dark SUV with a roof rack and that broken taillight that's been hanging loose for months. The same vehicle, Mr. Holloway, parks in the same spot at every board meeting. I've looked at that taillight a dozen times, wondering when he'd fix it. Derek's face went pale. His mouth opened, but produced nothing. Gloria stepped forward immediately, her voice sharp. "Martha, it was 2 a.m, completely dark. You have documented vision problems. You couldn't possibly make that identification at such a distance." But the damage was done. Conversations broke out across the room, neighbors turning to neighbors with raised eyebrows. Walter Briggs stood up near the front, his notebook still in hand. "I want to see the complete financial records," he said, "and the full meeting minutes, including whatever pages went missing. That's our right under state law and our own CC&Rs. Several voices echoed agreement. A woman near the back called out, asking why the board had never disclosed payments to Whitfield and Associates in annual summaries. The questions multiplied faster than Gloria could deflect them. Gloria struck her gavel against the podium 3 times. The sharp cracks cut through the noise, but her hand trembled slightly as she set the gavel down. A strand of hair had escaped her normally immaculate bun, and when she spoke, her voice carried an edge I hadn't heard before. "This meeting is adjourned due to safety concerns. Remaining agenda items will be rescheduled." She gathered her papers with movements that had lost their earlier precision, knocking a pen to the floor without stopping to retrieve it. Derek followed her toward the exit, head down, shoulders hunched. The other board members remained seated, frozen between loyalty and self-preservation. I stayed at the podium, watching the room fragment into confused clusters. Some residents approached Martha, asking her to repeat what she had seen. Others gathered around Walter, discussing how to formally request the documents he had demanded. The careful order Gloria had maintained for years was dissolving in real time, eroded by questions she couldn't answer and a witness she hadn't anticipated. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw a message from the data recovery specialist I had contacted 6 days ago, the technician who had been working to extract clearer frames from the corrupted portions of my trail camera footage. I had checked in with him twice already without result. His message now was brief and direct. "File recovered, 73% intact. Enhanced frames show identifiable faces. Call me immediately." I looked up from the screen at the door through which Gloria had disappeared. She thought she had escaped today's questions by ending the meeting early. She had no idea that the real answer was waiting on a hard drive across town, and that by tomorrow, her face would be the evidence she could never deny. The data recovery specialist worked out of a small office above a print shop on Commerce Street. Paul Hendricks, a former forensic analyst for the State Crime Lab, now made his living recovering files that people thought were lost forever. I had found him through a veterans network, one Marine vouching for another. When I arrived that Sunday morning, he was waiting with 2 monitors displaying side-by-side images. "The original file was about 40% degraded," he explained, pointing to the left screen. "Fragmented data across corrupted sectors. I spent 6 days reconstructing frame sequences using pattern interpolation." He clicked on the right monitor. "The infrared sensor captures heat signatures, not visible light, so facial features remain soft even in enhanced footage. But body proportions, gait patterns, and distinctive physical markers are recoverable. This is what your camera actually recorded." The enhanced footage showed 2 figures approaching my storage barn at 1:47 a.m. Infrared imaging rendered them in ghostly white against the cooler background, details emerging through careful reconstruction rather than photographic clarity. The taller figure had Derek Holloway's distinctive lanky frame, the same nervous head movements I had observed at board meetings, constantly checking over his shoulder toward my house. The shorter figure moved with the controlled efficiency of someone accustomed to directing others, silver blonde hair visible as a bright thermal signature pulled back from her face. Gloria Whitfield, Paul pointed to their movements. "Watch here." No hesitation, no confusion about where to pour the accelerant. They knew exactly what they were doing. The footage showed them working around the northeast corner with 2 red containers, the kind available at any hardware store. At 1:51 a.m., Derek produced a lighter. At 1:53, they retreated toward the road. Paul had enhanced a frame capturing the rear of their vehicle, license plate partially visible, enough characters to cross-reference against Derek's registration. The critical detail came at timestamp 1:52. Derek stumbled on uneven ground, and something fell from his jacket pocket. Paul had isolated that single frame, enhancing it until the shape became recognizable, an access card, the rectangular type used for electronic building entry. "It landed in a shallow depression near the foundation," Paul explained. "When the structure collapsed, debris from the wall created a partial barrier. The card would have been shielded from direct flame exposure, though still heat damaged. I knew exactly where that depression was. I had walked past it a dozen times without thinking to search. I left Paul's office with copies stored in 3 secure locations, an encrypted cloud server, a USB drive with my lawyer in the next county, and the original delivered directly to Roger Finch at the county fire station. Roger watched the footage twice without speaking. When he finished, he pulled out a form I hadn't seen before. Under State Protocol 714, evidence of identified suspects in a structural fire requires immediate referral to the Sheriff's Criminal Investigation Unit, he said. This stops being a fire inspection and becomes an arson case with named persons of interest. I'm making the call now. I returned to my property that afternoon with a borrowed metal detector and worked in a grid pattern across the debris field. The detector signaled 17 times before I found what mattered. Near the northeast corner, partially buried under collapsed siding, the access card lay exactly where Paul's footage suggested. Heat had blackened and curled its edges, but the embedded chip remained intact, and the serial number on the back was partially legible. I photographed it in place, then bagged it using the evidence procedures Roger had demonstrated. By evening, the card was in the sheriff's custody. The community had been shifting since the annual meeting, faster than I expected. Martha Jennings had told her story to anyone who would listen, and her account had unlocked something that had been building for years. Residents who had dismissed their own grievances as isolated incidents now recognized them as pieces of a pattern. A homeowner is pressured to sell after sudden violations. A couple who questioned expenses and found themselves targeted. The unease had always been there, lurking beneath polite silence, waiting for someone to speak first. Walter Briggs organized a phone tree among the original residents, and within 3 days, more than 40 households had committed to attending an emergency community meeting the following week. I contacted Diana Cole at the local television station, a reporter whose investigation into county zoning irregularities had twice mentioned Ridgecrest Meadows as a development of interest. She had been collecting complaints about HOA practices in the area for over a year, waiting for something concrete enough to build a story around. When I told her I had evidence connecting the HOA president to arson and a major development scheme, she didn't hesitate. "I've had 3 separate tips about that woman in the past 18 months, she said. "None of them had documentation. You're telling me you have footage?" I told her about the emergency meeting Walter was organizing. She agreed to attend with a camera crew, ready to document whatever unfolded. Gloria discovered the investigation 2 days later when a sheriff's deputy arrived at the HOA office with a warrant for financial records. I heard about her reaction from multiple neighbors before sunset. She had demanded representation for what she called a politically motivated attack on her leadership. Her attorney, after reviewing the preliminary evidence summary attached to the warrant, called her back within hours to decline the case. That same evening, Derek Holloway's SUV disappeared from his driveway. Neighbors had noticed his increasing agitation since the annual meeting, the way he avoided eye contact at the mailbox, the late-night arguments audible through thin walls. His wife told people he had left for a family emergency, but she couldn't say where or when he might return. Gloria was alone now, stripped of her closest ally, facing questions multiplying faster than she could deflect. But cornered animals fight hardest. The following morning, 3 residents who had spoken publicly against Gloria received anonymous letters. Each contained personal information never shared outside family circles, financial difficulties, medical conditions, and a son's arrest record from years ago. The message needed no signature. Gloria still had weapons, and she was willing to use them against anyone who threatened her position. Walter Briggs called me that afternoon, his voice tight with anger rather than fear. "She just made the worst mistake of her life," he said. "Half the people on my phone tree were undecided about coming forward. Now, every single one of them wants to be at that meeting. She doesn't understand that intimidation only works when people are alone. We're not alone anymore." The county district attorney announced a formal criminal investigation 4 days after the sheriff's office received my evidence. Under state law, the confirmed presence of accelerant residue combined with identified suspects required mandatory escalation to the prosecutorial level within 72 hours. The press release named no individuals but described suspected arson, insurance fraud, and financial misconduct within a residential homeowners association. Anyone following local news could connect the details. By evening, my phone had received more calls than it had in the previous 3 months combined. The investigation had become public knowledge, and with that publicity came consequences no one had anticipated. Derek Holloway's escape lasted exactly 6 days. State police located him at a motel outside Tucson, Arizona, using a credit card registered to his wife's maiden name. Extradition took 72 hours, and when he arrived back in county custody, his attorney moved quickly to negotiate a cooperation agreement. Under federal sentencing guidelines, arson in the first degree carried 15 to 25 years, but prosecutors routinely offered substantial reductions for testimony that exposed larger criminal networks, particularly in cases involving public corruption. Derek's deal would reduce his exposure to 8 to 12 years in exchange for full disclosure about the planning and execution of the fire, the financial arrangements with Meridian Development, and the systematic targeting of property owners who blocked the resort project. The agreement was formalized within a week. Gloria suddenly faced a co-conspirator willing to explain exactly how her machine had operated. Derek's testimony revealed details that the documents alone could never prove. The financial transfers to Whitfield and Associates had continued unchallenged because the HOA had not conducted an independent audit in over 6 years. Gloria had successfully blocked every proposal for external review by claiming the expense was unnecessary for a community of Ridgecrest's size. That cover allowed an additional $180,000 to flow through shell companies registered in neighboring states, all controlled by Gloria through layers of paperwork designed to obscure ownership. The access card recovered from my property matched Derek's employee file, and fingerprint analysis confirmed recent handling. Each piece connected to the next, forming a chain that led directly to the woman who had called my destruction an accident. The investigation expanded rapidly after the DA's office established a confidential tip line. Within 48 hours, 7 former property owners had contacted investigators describing experiences identical to mine. Each had been targeted with sudden violations, escalating fines, and liens that made holding their land financially impossible. All 7 had eventually sold to intermediary buyers who flipped the properties to Meridian at significant markups. The total damages across affected families exceeded $2 million. 3 agreed to testify at trial. Gloria had refined her methods over years of practice, confident that isolated victims would never connect their stories. She had not anticipated a tip line that would bring them together within days. The emergency community meeting Walter Briggs organized drew over 100 residents to the community center. He called the session to order and immediately moved to a vote of no confidence in the current board. The motion passed with 87% support. An independent financial audit was approved unanimously. The residents also voted to suspend all pending violation enforcement until the audit was complete, effectively freezing the liens against my property and others still fighting Gloria's manufactured debt. The legal and administrative machinery she had weaponized for years was grinding to a halt. Gloria attended the meeting, sitting alone in the back row. When Walter opened the floor for public comment, she walked to the microphone with measured steps, but something had changed in her bearing. The polished composure that had defined every previous interaction was fracturing visibly. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the microphone stand. Her voice, usually smooth and controlled, carried an edge of desperation I had never heard from her before. "Before you rush to judgment," she said, "you should know that I have information about many people in this room. Private information, financial difficulties, family problems, Things you wouldn't want made public. She paused, scanning faces as if expecting immediate submission. I've dedicated years to this community. If you turn against me now, I won't forget who stood where. The room went silent for exactly 3 seconds. Then a woman in the third row stood up. Are you threatening us in front of witnesses and cameras? Others echoed her indignation. A man near the windows held up his phone, recording. Martha Jennings, the woman whose arthritis had kept her awake the night of my fire, spoke without standing. Gloria, I've known you for 9 years. I've never seen you like this. This isn't leadership. This is panic. The observation cut deeper than any accusation. Gloria's expression shifted, the mask slipping further. She had built her power on appearing invincible. Now the community was watching her unravel in real time. Diana Cole's camera crew captured the entire exchange. She approached me after the meeting with a proposal that matched my own plans. Her station wanted to run a comprehensive report on HOA corruption, using Ridgecrest as the centerpiece. She had the financial documents, the cooperation agreement, and testimony from victims. But she needed visual evidence that would make the abstract concrete. I told her about the enhanced footage showing Gloria and Derek at my barn. She wanted to broadcast it immediately. I had a different idea. Show it at a public forum first. Let the community see it together before it goes to the world. They deserve that. She agreed, and we set the date for the following Thursday. Gloria received a subpoena the next morning, requiring her appearance at a preliminary hearing scheduled for the Monday after our planned public showing. The expedited timeline reflected the DA's concern that a suspect with financial resources and demonstrated willingness to threaten witnesses posed a flight risk similar to Derek's. The court agreed, compressing what normally took weeks into days. That same afternoon, Meridian Development issued a press release announcing the indefinite postponement of the Ridgecrest Resort project, citing unforeseen regulatory complications. Industry analysts who had been tracking the project for months, noting its dependence on rapid land acquisition and minimal community resistance, had already flagged it as high risk. The announcement confirmed their warnings. Meridian's stock dropped 4% by market close, shedding nearly $50 million in value as investors recalculated their exposure. Gloria had lost her co-conspirator to a cooperation deal. Her financial backers had abandoned the project that justified her crimes. Her community had voted to strip her authority. Her attorney had declined to represent her. All she had left was 1 week of freedom and the growing certainty that everything she had built was about to collapse in front of the people she had spent years deceiving. The footage waited on my laptop, ready to show them exactly who she was. Thursday evening arrived with the weight of everything that had been building since November. The community center's main hall had been reconfigured for the occasion, chairs facing a projection screen borrowed from the local high school. Diana Cole's camera crew occupied positions along the side walls. By 7 p.m., over 120 residents filled every seat, with more standing along the back. 2 sheriff's deputies waited in an unmarked vehicle outside, positioned there at the DA's request in case the evening's events provided grounds for immediate action. The active investigation meant law enforcement could respond within seconds if circumstances warranted. Gloria entered at 7:15 with a man whose demeanor suggested legal counsel. She had dressed carefully, in a conservative blazer and pearls, projecting the image of a respectable leader facing persecution. She took a seat in the front row where everyone could see her composure. Walter called the meeting to order at 7:30 and moved directly to the main agenda. Many of you have heard rumors about evidence related to the fire at Mr. Thornton's property, he said. Tonight, you'll see that evidence for yourselves. He nodded to me, and I connected my laptop to the projector. The footage played without narration, timestamp 1:47 a.m. 2 figures are approaching the storage barn in infrared clarity. At 1:51, containers emptied around the foundation. At 1:53, flames erupt from the base. Paul Hendricks had included the enhanced frame showing the shorter figure's profile as she turned toward the vehicle, the tight bun of silver blonde hair unmistakable, the partial license plate matching Derek Holloway's registration, the access card tumbling from a pocket, later recovered from the ashes with his fingerprints. 47 seconds of evidence that connected everything the community had been questioning for weeks. The footage ended, and the room held its breath. Gloria stood slowly. Her attorney gripped her arm and whispered something urgent, but she pulled free with a sharp motion. Weeks of mounting pressure, the investigation closing around her, Derek's cooperation deal, the community's growing hostility, all of it had been building toward this moment. She walked toward the center aisle with the rigid movements of someone operating beyond rational calculation. Her attorney called her name, but she ignored him completely. Whatever careful strategy she had planned for this evening had been overwhelmed by the footage playing on the screen. The faces of neighbors who had watched her commit arson in infrared detail. "You don't understand what I did for this community," she said, her voice carrying across the silent room. The controlled polish was gone, replaced by something raw and desperate. Property values were declining. The original vision was dying. Meridian offered investment, development, and a future worth having. All I had to do was remove the obstacles. Her gaze found me in the crowd. "Your farm was in the way. That barn was blocking progress worth millions. The compensation I received was earned. Do you think anyone else dared to make those decisions?" The room erupted. These were people who had spent weeks connecting their own experiences to the pattern Martha Jennings had first identified. Recognizing the violations that had seemed random, the fees that had seemed excessive, the pressure that had seemed personal, now they watched their suspicions confirmed by confession. Walter Briggs called for order, but the outrage had been building too long to be contained easily. Gloria's attorney finally reached her side and physically guided her toward the exit, but she twisted away one more time. "I built something here," she shouted over the noise. "You should be grateful." Martha Jennings stood in her row, her voice cutting through the chaos. "You burned a man's livelihood and called it leadership. That's not building anything. Gloria, that's destruction dressed up as duty." The side door opened, and the two deputies entered, moving with the deliberate pace of officers executing a planned action. Gloria saw them approaching and finally fell silent. The DA had authorized the arrest warrant that morning, contingent on any new evidence or admissions that emerged during the public forum. Her confession, captured by Diana Cole's cameras and witnessed by over 100 residents, more than satisfied that requirement. The lead deputy read from his prepared statement, "Gloria Whitfield, you are under arrest for arson in the first degree, insurance fraud, racketeering, and wire fraud. You have the right to remain silent." The Miranda warning continued while the second deputy secured her hands. Federal charges carried a combined exposure of 15 to 25 years. Gloria said nothing as they let her out, her expression finally empty. Diana Cole would air the footage and confession on the evening news the following day. The story would eventually be cited in state legislative discussions about HOA reform, referenced by attorneys handling similar cases across the region. Meridian Development's stock, already damaged by the project cancellation, would drop another 6% when the arrest footage circulated. Investors recognizing that the regulatory complications mentioned in press releases had been something far worse. The crowd dispersed slowly, clusters of neighbors processing what they had witnessed. Walter Briggs found me near the projection equipment. "The board has been working on something since the investigation began," he said quietly. "We didn't want to announce it until we knew the outcome tonight." He handed me a single sheet of paper, a proposal for a community rebuilding fund, financed by recovered HOA assets and voluntary contributions, designated to assist families affected by Gloria's schemes. The document had been drafted 3 weeks earlier, refined through multiple board sessions, held without Gloria's knowledge. "Your property is first on the list," Walter continued. "The damages you suffered started all of this. It's only right that the repair starts with you." I looked at the paper, then at the empty chair where Gloria had sat, then at the neighbors still talking in small groups throughout the hall. Some of them had believed the rumors about insurance fraud. Some had avoided my eyes at the hardware store. Now they were discussing how to help rebuild what had been destroyed. I thought about the trail camera still mounted on my Remington, the device that had captured 47 seconds of truth. It had been designed to track predators threatening my livestock. In the end, it had done exactly that. 6 months passed before I could stand in front of my new storage barn without feeling the weight of what had been destroyed. Spring had arrived in Ridgecrest Meadows, painting the pastures in shades of green that seemed impossibly vivid after the gray winter that had nearly broken me. The barn itself was modest, corrugated steel walls like the original, but built this time with fire-resistant materials and a proper sprinkler system that the insurance company had required before approving coverage. The Community Rebuilding Fund had covered most of the construction costs. My own settlement had covered the rest, with enough left over to start again. Gloria Whitfield's trial concluded in early March, 4 months after her arrest at the community center. The federal prosecutor presented evidence that filled 3 days of testimony, financial records tracing payments from Meridian Development through shell companies to accounts she controlled. Derek Holloway's detailed cooperation about the planning and execution of the arson, the enhanced footage that showed her directing the destruction of my property, and the access card recovered from the ashes with fingerprints that placed Derek at the scene. Her defense attorney argued that she had acted in what she believed was the community's best interest, that the development project would have benefited everyone, that her methods, while regrettable, were motivated by service rather than greed. The jury deliberated for 6 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. The judge sentenced her to 18 years in federal prison, with no possibility of parole for the first 12. She would be 73 years old before she breathed free air again. Derek Holloway received 8 years as agreed in his cooperation deal. His testimony had been essential to proving the conspiracy charges, documenting conversations and planning sessions that connected Gloria's instructions to specific criminal acts. He would serve his time in a minimum security facility, separated from the woman whose orders he had followed into destruction. During his sentencing hearing, he apologized to me directly, his voice breaking as he described the moment he had lit the match that destroyed my winter stockpile. I didn't forgive him. Some things don't deserve forgiveness, but I acknowledged his words with a nod, recognizing that whatever punishment awaited him, he would carry the memory of what he had done for the rest of his life. Meridian Development settled the civil lawsuit filed by the 8 affected families for $3.2 million, distributed according to documented damages. My share came to $420,000, compensation for the storage barn, the livestock I had been forced to sell, the equipment that had melted in the fire, and the months of income lost while fighting to keep my property. The money couldn't restore the years of work that had gone into building my herd, couldn't undo the sleepless nights or the weight of suspicion from neighbors who had believed Gloria's whispered accusations. But it provided something equally valuable: the resources to rebuild without compromising, to construct a farm that would outlast whatever challenges the future might bring. The HOA underwent a complete transformation in the months following Gloria's arrest. Walter Briggs was elected president by unanimous vote, the first such consensus in the association's history. His first official act was commissioning an independent audit that revealed the full extent of Gloria's financial manipulation, $60,000 annually in fraudulent consulting fees, plus the hidden payments from Meridian that had never appeared in any HOA document. The new board drafted revised CC&Rs with input from every household in the community, including explicit protections for agricultural operations on A1 zoned land and transparency requirements that mandated public access to all financial records and meeting minutes. Martha Jennings volunteered to attend every board meeting as an unofficial observer, her notebook always open, her questions always sharp. She had learned that vigilance was the price of honest governance, and she was determined to pay it for as long as her arthritis would allow. Diana Cole's story aired on the evening news the day after Gloria's arrest and was picked up by national networks within the week. Her comprehensive report on HOA corruption became a reference point for reform advocates across the country, cited in legislative hearings and legal briefs arguing for stronger oversight of homeowners associations. She won a Regional Journalism Award for the series, and her acceptance speech mentioned Ridgecrest Meadows by name, describing it as a community that had found the courage to confront abuse and demand accountability. I watched the ceremony from my living room, thinking about how close I had come to losing everything, how easily Gloria's system could have ground me down if a single piece of evidence had been lost or overlooked. The Remington 870 still hangs on the wall of my new barn, mounted above the main entrance where anyone entering can see it. The frame is warped from heat exposure, the stock blackened by flames that should have destroyed everything it recorded. The trail camera remains attached to the barrel, a small weatherproof device that captured 47 seconds of the truth in the darkness of a November night. Below the gun, I installed a simple brass plaque with words I had considered for months before finally choosing. The truth never burns. Visitors sometimes ask about the display, and I tell them the story in whatever detail they want to hear. Most of them already know the broad strokes from Diana's reporting. What they want to understand is how it felt to stand in the ashes of everything I had built and decide to fight instead of surrender? The answer is simpler than they expect. I fought because surrendering would have meant accepting that people like Gloria could destroy lives without consequence, that systems designed to protect communities could be weaponized against the people they were supposed to serve, that money and power would always triumph over truth and persistence. I refused to accept those conclusions. So I gathered evidence when evidence seemed impossible to find. I asked questions when questions were met with threats. I trusted neighbors who had been taught to distrust me. And eventually, some of them trusted me back. The victory wasn't mine alone. It belonged to Martha, who spoke up despite her fear, to Walter, who organized resistance when resistance seemed futile, to every resident who voted to strip Gloria's authority and demand accountability from the institution they had funded with their fees and trusted with their homes. I walk my property every morning now, checking on the new herd of goats I purchased with part of my settlement, collecting eggs from chickens that have never known the shadow of the barn that burned. The pastures are green, the fences are solid, and the storage barn holds enough feed to carry my livestock through any winter the weather might bring. Some mornings, I stop at the entrance and look up at the shotgun mounted on the wall, the camera that saved everything I had left. It reminds me that truth has a way of surviving, even when someone tries to burn it to the ground. It reminds me that justice is possible when people refuse to stop fighting for it. And it reminds me that the strongest weapon I ever carried wasn't the gun itself. It was the evidence that the gun recorded, and the courage to use it when the moment finally came. They burned my barn. They committed violations to steal my land. They turned my neighbors against me with whispered lies. But they made one mistake. They didn't know my shotgun carried a witness they couldn't silence. If you've ever felt powerless against an HOA that abuses its authority, remember this. The truth survives when you refuse to let it die.